Homeless veteran begged to play piano for food. They laughed until his talent shocked all. On a cold evening, a weary veteran stood outside a bustling café, his worn clothes and tired eyes telling a story that no one cared to hear. His boots were torn, his hands calloused, and his voice was faint as he asked if anyone could spare him a little food. Most people passed him by without a glance, some with judgment in their eyes, others pretending not to notice. Inside the café, laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and warmth filled the air. The veteran's gaze fell upon an elegant piano sitting in the corner, polished and untouched. Gathering his courage, he stepped forward and made a humble request that startled the crowd. He asked if he could play the piano in exchange for a meal. At first, silence filled the café, then sudden bursts of laughter. People shook their heads, whispering among themselves, mocking the thought that this homeless man could possibly know how to play such an instrument. To them, he was a beggar reaching too far, someone with shaky hands who could never belong near, something so refined. Yet the veteran did not lower his eyes. He stood with quiet dignity, waiting for an answer, his hunger outweighed by an unspoken determination. Reluctantly, the cafe owner agreed, more to entertain the customers than to grant him kindness. The old man slowly approached the piano, lowering himself onto the bench. The audience leaned forward with smirks, ready to witness his failure. But the moment his fingers touched the keys, the room transformed. A delicate note rang out, followed by another, until a melody so rich and haunting filled the cafe that the laughter stopped at once. The veteran's hands, though weathered, glided across the keys with grace and power, each chord carrying emotion that words could never express. Conversations ceased, drinks were set down, and even the waiters paused to listen. The crowd, moments ago so dismissive, now sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the man they had ridiculed. The music spoke of years of sacrifice, of battles fought, and scars carried deep within, of pain, hope, and memories of a life that had once been whole. As the song built, tears welled in the eyes of strangers. Some whispered in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a man who looked so broken could produce something so extraordinary. Then came the revelation from an elderly patron who recognized him. This was no ordinary man. He had once been a celebrated pianist, performing in grand halls before duty called him to serve his country. War had taken everything from him, his family, his career, and his home. Now he stood before them stripped of glory, yet still carrying the gift that time could never erase. When the final note lingered in the air, the cafe erupted into applause, echoing louder than the music itself. People rushed forward, offering food, money, and apologies, ashamed of how quickly they had judged him. The veteran, with tears in his eyes, finally received the respect he had long been denied. That night, the cafe witnessed more than music. It witnessed redemption, reminding all that true greatness never fades and that dignity belongs to everyone, no matter how life has treated them. On a chilly evening, the streets were alive with chatter, but for one worn-out veteran, the night carried nothing but hunger and exhaustion. His clothes were tattered, his shoes nearly falling apart, and his eyes, though tired, still carried a spark of pride that life had not managed to dim. He wandered until he reached a lively cafe, its warm glow spilling out into the cold night. Inside, people laughed, clinked their glasses, and enjoyed steaming meals, while he stood at the doorway clutching his empty stomach. With a trembling voice, he asked for food, but his request was met with cold stares, dismissive gestures, and whispers that cut deeper than hunger ever could. Then his gaze shifted to the piano in the corner, gleaming under soft lights, waiting silently as if it called to him. Gathering his courage, he asked if he might play in exchange for something to eat. His words drew laughter instead of compassion. Customers mocked him, amused by the idea of a beggar touching such an elegant instrument. To them, he was a man, of the streets, undeserving of something so refined, and they expected nothing but clumsy noise from his hands. At last, the café owner, giving in to the crowd's amusement, granted permission. Slowly, the veteran shuffled toward the piano, each step heavy with both hope and humiliation. The room quieted, not out of respect but in anticipation of his failure. He sat down, straightened his back, and placed his weathered fingers on the keys. For a brief moment, silence stretched, and then the first note emerged, clear and resonant. What followed stunned everyone present. A melody poured forth that was so moving, so soulful, it silenced every smirk and laugh. Each note carried pieces of his past, moments of triumph, years of loss, and the unspoken sorrow of a man who had given everything yet received so little in return. The café transformed, filled not just with music, but with raw emotion that reached every heart. Strangers who moments ago sneered now leaned forward with wide eyes, their laughter replaced with awe. Conversations froze, forks paused mid-air, and even the waiters stood still, captivated by the unexpected brilliance. As his fingers glided effortlessly across the keys, the music deepened, weaving stories that words could not tell. Some in the crowd felt tears sting their eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty flowing from someone they had dismissed as nothing. A voice in the crowd finally revealed his identity. He had once been a celebrated pianist, gracing concert halls with his extraordinary gift before war stripped him of everything. Years of hardship had reduced him to a shadow of himself, but his talent had never left. The truth struck the crowd with shame as they realized the greatness hidden behind ragged clothes. When the final note faded into the night, silence hung, heavy before the café erupted in thunderous applause. People stood, clapping with tears streaming down their faces, offering food, money, and heartfelt apologies. The man who had entered hungry and ridiculed left with dignity restored, his music having reminded everyone that true worth lies not in appearances, but in the unseen strength of the soul. As the melody deepened, the entire café seemed to fall, under a spell. The man who had entered moments earlier, mocked and dismissed as a beggar, was now commanding the room with a grace that none had expected. His fingers, though aged and rough from years of hardship, glided across the keys with the precision of someone who had once lived and breathed music. Each note rang with emotion so pure it was impossible not to feel it. Some of the guests found their eyes filling with tears, moved by something they couldn't explain. The music was not just sound. It was a story, pouring from the depths of his soul. A story of battles fought, sacrifices made, and the heavy weight of years spent forgotten. Whispers began to ripple through the audience as the realization set in that this was no ordinary man. His posture, his control, the way he pulled emotions from the instrument, it all hinted at a past that was far greater than the rags he now wore. Then came the quiet voice of an older patron who recognized him. This wasn't just a homeless veteran. Once upon a time, he had been a celebrated pianist, a man who graced the grandest of stages and played before audiences that filled entire halls. He had been someone who commanded respect, someone whose name was once known in the world of music. But life had not been kind. War had taken him away from the stage, dragging him into battlefields where music was drowned out by chaos. He had returned with scars both visible and hidden, and slowly everything he had built crumbled. His family slipped away. His career vanished, and with each passing year he fell deeper into shadows until the world forgot him. Now, left with nothing, the only piece of himself that remained untouched was his music. It was the last light inside him, and here in this café it shone again, as if he had been waiting all these years for someone to finally listen. The crowd that had laughed at him moments ago now sat in silence, guilt mixing with admiration. They were witnessing not just a performance but the rebirth of a man's identity. Every chord carried the weight of his journey. Every soft note whispered of love lost, and every rising crescendo screamed of resilience that could not be broken. His music painted images in the minds of everyone listening, of his younger days on a stage, of his time in uniform, of nights spent alone battling memories, and of the quiet strength it took to survive. By the time the final notes faded, the café was not the same. The people inside were not the same. They had mocked him, yet he gave them a gift that money could never buy. The gift of truth, of beauty, and of a reminder that greatness never truly disappears. In that moment, his forgotten talent was reborn, and so was the respect that the world owed him. When the last note lingered in the air, a silence swept across the café, but it was no longer the silence of mockery or disbelief. It was a silence filled with awe, a silence heavy with emotions too strong to put into words. Then, as if on cue, the entire room erupted into thunderous applause. People stood to their feet, clapping with tears streaming down their faces, their shame hidden in the noise of admiration. The very same crowd that had laughed only moments before now looked at the veteran with respect burning in their eyes. The man who had entered with trembling hands, too hungry to stand tall, now sat with dignity restored, his music having reminded everyone of the humanity they had forgotten to show. Strangers rushed toward him, some offering food, others slipping money into his hands, while a few quietly whispered apologies for their earlier cruelty. The café owner, once skeptical, approached him with a bowed head and promised that he would never go hungry again if he chose to play there whenever he wished. For the veteran, this was not just applause. It was acceptance. It was acknowledgement that he still mattered, that his story and his gift had value. The weight of years spent ignored and overlooked seemed to fall from his shoulders in that moment. He had walked in as a beggar desperate for food, but he was leaving as an artist whose gift had shaken the hearts of everyone who heard it. The shame belonged not to him, but to those who had judged him without knowing his journey. That night, the crowd carried home more than just the sound of music. They carried a lesson that would stay with them forever, that greatness is often hidden behind appearances, and that dignity should never be stripped from any soul, no matter how broken they might look. They realized kindness costs nothing, but its absence can wound deeply, while its presence can change lives. The veteran, though still carrying the scars of war and the burden of years lost, walked away with his head high, knowing his music had given him back the respect he had once lost. The café, once filled with laughter at his expense, had become the stage for his redemption, and those who witnessed it would never forget the night they mocked a hungry man only to discover a master whose music touched their hearts more deeply than words ever could. It was not just a performance. It was a reminder that behind every weary face lies a story, and sometimes, when given a chance, that story can transform an entire room.